Team, today we're going to be talking about 6 pricing strategies for designers. Let's do this. So, firstly, there is not one way to price. The 6 that I have laid out in this presentation are just to give you some ideas, just to give you some actual feedback on what I have done in the past. And like I've always kind of believed is that your strategies for pricing and the way you price will naturally evolve as your career evolves, because you'll understand better ways to do stuff based on your process. You'll understand more efficient ways to price based on your process. You'll understand how you like to work with clients and yada, yada, yada. So this whole premise of like one size fits all when it comes to pricing is cat turd. It doesn't exist because it totally depends on where you are in your career, where you are in the world, how the kind of work you do. So what I want to do is I want to just give you 6 variations of how I've priced over my career. And it'll be fun, all right? So let's have fun. We've got to have more fun. It's important to have more fun. So these are the 6 ways I have priced my design work, okay? And like I said, like what I did at the very beginning is very different to what I did now. And I still, depending on the client, depending on the project, depending on who they are, I always find different ways to be flexible and work with the client based on what I think would be the best outcome for myself and the client, okay? And we can talk about these and you'll see how these 6 different variations will align with that, all right? So, firstly, now, I've got pros and cons for every single one of these, so I'm not going to dive too deep into those. Rather more so, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk to you about what they are to me, and I'm going to give these PDFs away in this writing below somewhere, so you can just take them and read them. But for me, hourly is essentially where we start, and that's where I started. Now it's very easy to work out, like, this project I think is going to take me 10 hours and I'm going to charge $50, so that's going to be 500. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very simple way of creating an idea based on the value that you can execute. It's a very simple way to math-wise to be able to price work, and especially in the beginning when you're still trying to figure stuff out, like going down into like fixed value-based pricing is almost impossible for a beginner. So because it's too complicated and there's too many nuances and all the rest of it depending on the client. So in the early stage, I think it's really important to kind of work on this hourly rate. And as you can see here, there are pros and cons to both of those. You know, pros: transparent pricing, fair compensation, flexibility, reduced risk, incentive for quality. And then obviously the cons: income uncertainty, client hesitation, administrative burden because you've got to invoice more. And client hesitation is they're probably hesitant because they don't know how long it's going to take, so they're not too sure how much it's going to cost. So they may be a little bit wary of going in an hourly based kind of process. Perceived value issues because clients may focus on hours rather than output. You know, I want you to do this in no more than 3 hours. It becomes tough. And then micromanagement risk because they're wanting it to be done, or clients might perceive that they want it to be done quicker because they know it's costing them more the longer it takes. They might be prodding you and poking you to get it done. So think about that. These are the pros and cons for hourly, all right? Second, the fixed. Now, this is something that I did for a very, very long time. It's something that I still do to some degree today. You'll see many designers who'll have like multiple fixed price packages, which can work fantastic. But the main thing when it comes to a fixed price per project kind of scenario is you need to have a very refined process, and you need to have established a very refined set of deliverables, because you need to stop scope creep. You need to understand, and the reason why the process is so important is because you need to know how long stuff takes you. You need to be able to price based on the almost guesstimated amount of time it might take on any particular kind of project. Now, the issue with a fixed base price is that so many clients are so different. They have different personalities, they have different ways of giving feedback, they have different priorities on what they want and how much they trust their designer, and all of these kind of bits and pieces. So it's really, really important that if you are going to be working to a fixed based price, like I said, you have to have your process down. You have to be very transparent and very communicative about your process and outline the steps you're going to take throughout the project to let the client feel at ease and to understand what they're going to get and when they're going to get it and how long it's going to take. The fixed base price is great, but there are obviously pros and cons to both, like I've seen here. So like predictable income for pros, client appeal. The client likes it because essentially they know that this is going to be the price and they can budget to that. So they're not going to be kind of lost with knowing how much they're investing. Deliverable focus, efficiency rewards, reduced admin work, obviously, because you only have to essentially do like maybe a 50% deposit invoice and maybe a 50% kind of final payment invoice, whereas if you're doing hourly, you might have to, every month, like 4 hours here, 5 hours here, 10 hours here, 2 hours here. Do you know what I mean? Like it becomes a very admin heavy. Cons to the fixed, obviously the obvious scope creep. Clients might try and push the deliverables whilst in the project, and you might not have necessarily priced for those. In this scenario, it's very easy. Just say, unfortunately, like I can definitely help you with these things, but it's actually out of the scope of work that we discuss. So I'm more than happy to add this, but what I'll do is I'll add it to the bill at the end. Very much like a restaurant would do. Like if you're eating some steak and chips and you see a really nice pot of gravy go past and you want a pot of gravy, and you ask the waiter, can I have that pot of gravy? And do you know what? I'll also have some extra chips. Do you know what I mean? What they'll do is they'll just go and get those for you and add them to your bill at the end. But you've got to be very transparent about this, all right? So scope creep is very easily alleviated through communication and transparency. But, within the fixed-based price structure, it's very apparent, so just be wary of that. Underestimation of time, complex projects, less flexibility, and delivery pressure, stress to meet fixed deliverables, for a certain period, for a certain amount of money. Do you know what I mean? The fixed. Now, the value. So this is probably one of the most spoken about pricing structures on the internet, and for good reason, because it makes perfect sense. Now, even though it makes perfect sense, it is one of the most complex kind of pricing formulas to figure out. Essentially, in very, very, very simple terms, made by James, simple terms, imagine value-based pricing is essentially the estimated increase in value for the client divided by a percentage for the designer. So in kind of, very simple terms, for example, I imagine like a designer, for example, can estimate the value that their work is going to do is going to increase a brand's turnover or revenue by, or value by, I should say, by 100,000. What essentially a designer might do is they might charge 10% of that for that value they have created. So what they would do is, if they can estimate or calculate 100,000 in growth, in revenue, in value, a client would go, well, I want to charge 10% of that based on the value that I'm creating. So their price would be 10,000, but they might say 20%, they might say 30%, and that's how that they would do their maths. Now, as I said, this makes perfect sense, but it does vary from client to client, and it is somewhat difficult to be accurate with, because you can't accurately estimate actual potential income. So it's quite difficult to get the client on board with it. But it does make perfect sense if you can get the client on board with understanding the complexities and the nuances of it all. But with this, the pros are obviously aligned interests, higher revenue potential, especially imagine if you're working with a big brand, your earning potential is much higher because you can create more value for them. But then with the smaller client, less so. So which is why I don't think the value-based pricing structure works in certain circumstances, but not all circumstances. Enhanced perception, results focus, obviously. The cons, like I've mentioned, complex calculations, client resistance because, they might resist the higher prices because they can't quite get to how you evaluated those higher prices. Unpredictable revenue because, like I said, depending on the client, depending on the amount of value you can create for the individual clients, your income will naturally go up and down. Risks in overestimation and longer sales process. Convincing the clients of value can be quite time consuming for designers, like I said, because there has to be some analytical kind of process involved that helps you sell the value that you are essentially bringing to the client. So just remember this: estimated increase of value times percentage of the value created is how you might value-based price your work. The calculated risk. Now, this is something that I've done a couple of times, and it has worked. It's also not worked, but essentially what it is this idea, and it's a way of pricing where you become essentially a partner with your client. So let's say a project would cost like 40,000. Do you know what I mean? Like to the client, but to you, cost-wise, it might cost you 10. 15 or whatever it is. Essentially what you would do is you would give your client the cost price, so the 10 and the 15, but then what you would say is like, I will give you this for cost at this price rather than this price, but what I want a royalty, or I want some shares or some equity in the company for a certain amount of time, because essentially I can give you this slightly cheaper price up front, but I am going to be rewarded for the success of the brand moving forward. So this is great because the client gets, they get hit with a little smaller bill at the beginning, and they're just basically paying you out in dividends or royalties over a prolonged period of time. So it is a slightly longer game when you're trying to price this calculated risk way, but it can potentially bring huge rewards. Now, this is not something that you should do for every client. This is something that I only started to do when, like I said, we call it the calculated risk, when I saw there was enough potential, but it wasn't going to ruin my business if it didn't work out. So like I said, it's really, really important. You'd still go through the whole process of pricing up the project. It would equate to a certain number. If you see potential, you could ask your, especially if it's a friend or somebody else, or you've been working with them before, they've come to you with this kind of offer. Basically what you would essentially do is you'd give it to them for cost, but then you would make money in dividends and equity later down the line. Again, it involves more paperwork and bits and pieces like that, but is another option where basically, like I said, you give it for cost and you make your money off the back end. Now, pros with this: high earning potential, aligned interests, lower initial cost for the client, ownership stake in businesses. You're motivated and incentivized to do better work, because the better work you do, the more chance you have of that kind of equitable success further down the line. Now the cons: uncertain income, delayed earnings, complex agreements, like I mentioned, underpayment risk, and opportunity cost. So just always bear in mind, like I said, always the pros and the cons of each of these kind of ideas that I'm giving you. This is a great one if you've built trust with somebody and they trust you and you want to take a little bit of a punt. But always, as I said, just make sure you're covering your costs. And like I said, that you got to remember that there will be extra costs and paperwork and stuff further down the line. So always save this one in the back burner for your entrepreneurial spirit. All right. Number 5, the retainer. Now, this is Another great option, and again, it's something that doesn't have too many complexities to it, but there are, again, pros and cons to it. But essentially, let's kind of say, for this example, you price a project for your client. It's going to cost them $80,000. I'm just doing like really random math here. What you would do is you might say to them, look, what I'm happy to do is I'm happy to split this $80,000 over a year. Do you know what I mean? So what you'd go from, rather than like $80,000 up front, they could pay that $80,000 over a year. Now that would be a monthly based kind of direct debit, or what it is, or what is it, like 6,500, 7,000-ish, do you know what I mean, a month. Now, what is great about this is it allows the client, they will sign a contract, they'll sign a direct debit, so they have to pay this money. But what they get to do is they get to spread that big price out over a whole year, which frees up some of their surplus cash to spend on other things that they might need to spend it on. Now, this is not the greatest thing for you because you're waiting a year to get that money back. But what you've got to remember is that over that year, they might need a huge amount more stuff. Now, I'm not saying that you would stop, let's say they wanted a website. You wouldn't take a year to build the website. You'd still do it in the amount of time that you've mentioned to the client, whether that's 12 weeks or 16 weeks or whatever it is, depending on the size of the website, obviously. You still do it in the time frame that you've agreed to with the client, but you just spread out the payments. But like I said, as you're with the client for a whole year, they're going to have access to you. They're going to need more things. So you've actually got the opportunity to upsell more things. When you become their trusted partner, they will come back to you with other things that they need. They might even be more likely to send other clients your way because you're with them for a prolonged period of time. So what you're actually buying with this retainer style pricing structure is their trust. You're building this reputation with them, which will allow you to possibly make more money along the way. And why, after a year, if you've done a great job for them and it's working out, why wouldn't they keep you on for another year? And maybe it's rather than an 80 grand retainer, it's a 40 grand retainer where they come to you whenever they need things and they get a certain amount of allotted hours. But essentially, the retainer in this aspect is a price, a large or any particular price. I mean, it's probably better when it comes to a bigger project. You wouldn't necessarily want to eke out $1,000 over a year. You probably, when you're getting into those kind of 5 figures, this is probably a pricing structure that would work. And like I said, you break that down into 6-month or 12 monthly payments. But the beauty of it is you get to stay with that client and be on that client's radar for a whole 6 months or a whole year, where they get to trust you and your reputation builds with them, and they're more likely to give you more work on top of the retainer money. All right, so just think about that one because it's a good one that can work, but again, long game thinking. All right, number 6, the freebie. Now, you can still do freebies, Nate. All this malarkey on the internet from all the design gurus and influencers on the internet who tell you should never do free work. I still do free work. I know a lot of my friends who still do free work. The beauty of it is free work has to be your choice. If somebody comes to me and asks for something for free, I will politely say no. But if a client will come to me and they're doing some good things for good people around the world and they're trying to make it better, my gut will go, do you know what, James? Maybe you should give this one to them for free. Again, there's a set of deliverables. There's a certain things that I will do. There's a certain amount I will do for free. But free work is your choice. So don't listen to all the gumph out there that's telling you that you should never do free work. And, my business was built on free work. I used to do free work for my friends, free work for their bands, free work for their businesses. I did free work to just build confidence in my creativity when I started out to where I am today, 20 years later. And I still do elements of free work. So please don't listen to the gumph on the internet. All right. It's your choice. You do what you want, mate. All right. So there you go. That was a long one, but a good one. The freebie is going to be down below where you can go into the pros and cons a little bit more, but absorb more knowledge. Hit subscribe. Enjoy.